Hello everyone, this is Lam here. In today's video, I want to get a little bit philosophical. I really want to talk about the camera market and how we interpret where the market is going. This is specifically for consumers. I'm really not talking about professionals. Professionals have their own little niche. The consumer market is so important for these array of camera devices right in front of me here, and I want to talk a little bit about them and where I think it's headed and why I think the actual mirrorless market or the DSLR market needs to change with the times in order to keep up with this juggernaut over here, which is the smartphone market. Now, we're at a point where a lot of things are changing, and I just feel like the camera market that we all know and love, they're really not changing enough to actually differentiate ourselves, and it's going to be swallowed up by the smartphone market if we don't start seeing some drastic changes pretty soon. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and start down at the very end over here. Now, what you see right here, this is actually the first camcorder or the first camera I used when I started making YouTube videos. I figured I wanted something super easy and small, and I got a camcorder. At that time, really mirrorless or even DSLR recording a video wasn't really that big of a thing. Wasn't really into any of the Panasonic stuff, so I went ahead and got a camcorder. And to be honest with you, at the time when I actually purchased this, it was actually a great purchase. You can tell right here, full HD. This was the time when 4K wasn't even a thing yet. And this was actually a great video camera for me for many years. You can tell that it's actually still working. It's probably over a decade old. I still have it and I still pull it out every once in a while. Just kind of remind me where we actually came from. The interesting thing about camcorders is that this market is basically getting crushed. It is dying a very slow and horrible death, mostly because the smartphones have kind of taken away the casual market for video recording, and then the more professional, the more semi-professionals are really going out and going into the mirrorless cameras. And what this has left us is basically an industry in which they can't really innovate anymore because they're just not getting the profits they need to do that. When was the last time you really considered getting a camcorder? Nobody really does that. Nobody reviews it. Nobody really wants to bring out truly innovative products. On the professional side, they are still using camcorders, but even then, a lot of them are moving over to the mirrorless systems, the detachable lenses, because it gives them greater flexibility, and in large part because the autofocus system, which was terrific in these camcorders, these mirrorless cameras have caught up, and they have caught up really quickly to the point where the autofocus really isn't an issue anymore. Really, this thing is obsolete technology, and it probably will not be around in the next couple of years. These two are now the dominant players, but even then, year after year, what we're seeing is that the mirrorless market, the DSLR market, is losing ground to things like the smartphone. Really, the smartphone is the juggernaut in the house right now. It's pretty much steamrolling everybody, and whether you like it or not, they're bringing in enough money to where they can put in millions, if not billions of dollars into research to try to replace these two markets right here. The mirrorless cameras are really benefiting from the camcorder dying off because the money that used to go to camcorders is now moving over to the mirrorless cameras, and that's the reason why a lot of mirrorless cameras are incorporating such amazing video features. They are in essence swallowing the camcorder market. One of the things that could technically happen is that the smartphone market will eventually swallow up the video and DSLR market because of the technology. Just because there's so much money coming into this market right here, we're just getting so much money that can be dumped into R&D. Whereas with the mirrorless market, we're really seeing a slowdown in terms of people wanting to purchase this equipment. One of the more interesting debates right now is whether or not the smartphone market will eventually be able to swallow up the DSLR and mirrorless market. And I'm talking about for the consumer market, not for the professional market. There will always be a niche for professional DSLRs and professional mirrorless cameras, one or the other, depending on how you want to look at it. But for the consumer market, which is really important because there's a lot of money that gets spent on the consumer side, which can in turn be dumped into R&D to improve the products, you really do need the consumer support. Where I differ from other people's opinions is that I think we need to look at how cell phones are being sold and then actually incorporating that into the mirrorless and DSLR markets. The reason why smartphones are being sold sold in such mass quantities is because the cellular market has figured out the way to spread out the payments or the cost of this smartphone over a period of 24 to 30 months. And this payment strategy is amazing in how well it works. You're talking about at this point that middle schoolers are already getting smartphones and they're already being indoctrinated into the buying process of smartphones. They're pretty much lifers at this point, which means the smartphone market has guaranteed paying customers for the rest of their life starting at the age of middle school, which is kind of ridiculous. In my opinion, the biggest flaw to DSLR and mirrorless market right now is that the barrier entry to actually get one of these cameras is too high. Take right here, this is the Fuji X-T3. This is actually a great camera and it's very affordable. In terms of value propositions, I think this is one of the best cameras that you can get right now for $1,500 for the body. It is an amazing body packed with amazing technology. You combine it with a maybe used $170 lens and you got what we consider to be a very high-end camera. The problem is that you have to pay pretty much $1,800 right from the get-go in order to get in the door. And that is a really tough decision right now for a lot of consumers to make. $1,800 is just a ton of money. And one of the things that we really need to work on as photographers, as videographers, is how to lower that barrier of entry. Because right now, what we're seeing is that a lot of people are saying, that's too much money, this is enough. And as an enthusiast in this market, this is not something that we want, but this is something that needs to be fixed if we want to actually have a market in the future. Year after year, what we're hearing for photography and videography in the consumer market is that the market is shrinking and that all of the major brands are basically fighting for a smaller piece of the pie. What this is telling me is that the innovations that we're currently working on, in other words, increased dynamic range, megapixels, better image quality, they're getting diminishing returns. We can improve upon these things, but the consumer market, the mass market, is saying that the quality is good enough even at the smartphone level that I don't care about these incremental improvements. What I really care about is portability and also the price of entry. And this is something that we need to work on. And I think the first part of working on this is we got to lower the barrier of entry to get into photography and also videography. And we really need to show that this is a better way to take better pictures and that it's worth the investments. And that's something that we're not doing right now. And we really drastically need to improve that in 2019, or we're just going to continue to see this downward trend. And eventually, our market's going to disappear. So that's kind of the point of this video, is that the things that we're enthused about, the things that we talk about, which is dynamic range, megapixels, and all this stuff, does the consumer market care anymore? And why are we focused in on that if the consumer market doesn't care? As enthusiasts, we're going to go down there and we're going to argue for it, but there's only so many of us and we're not growing in the populations that we need to in order to keep our market alive. So we really need to actually step back and think about what we need to do to actually make our community grow, as opposed to arguing between communities saying which camera is better, because that's kind of nonsense anyways. But that's something to think about over the holiday season. This is kind of a philosophical vlog for the Christmas season. I just wanted to get it out there because I find it so interesting that we can actually have amazing technology and it is coming down in price, but yet our community is slowly dying out. It's slowly getting smaller because we just aren't getting the interest from the mass community that we once used to get. Anyways, that's all I have for this video. For those of you celebrating the holiday season, I hope you have a good one, and I will see you in the next video.